better mood throughout. Reading from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. As for me, brothers, when I came to you, it was not with any show of oratory or philosophy, but simply to tell you what God has guaranteed. During my stay with you, the only knowledge I claimed to have was about Jesus, and only about him as the crucified Christ. Far from relying on any power of my own, I came among you in great fear and trembling. And in my speeches and sermons that I gave, there were none of the arguments that belong to philosophy, only a demonstration of the power of the Spirit. And I did this so that your faith should not depend on human philosophy, but on the Spirit of God. I can think of no greater statement of what the purpose of Pine Hill or any church or any preacher is about than that. It is true that at times we begin to reach out and reflect upon the philosophical and the economic systems. At times we reflect on what's happening in the world, and at times we're interested in knowing the broad human knowledge. But ultimately that knowledge is set into the setting of God's active Spirit in our lives. For without that, there is no reason for us to be here. We are a totally inarticulate classroom. We are a totally non-productive social club. We are not the best educational system in the world. We are people of God. And because we are people of God, we ought to be infected as well as affected with His Spirit, so that every single aspect of our lives are done not because they are important socially or intellectually, but as Paul said, they are important because they reflect God in our lives. It is at that point that we become truly the greatest of social and fellowship groups. It is at that point that we become truly, in the high calling of God, the best of educational systems. It is at that point where God infecting us and changing our behavior that we become truly the best in terms of the ethical and moral decisions that must be made. And as this church or any church goes through a period of reflection and an anniversary and the welcoming of new members and the baptism and the sitting around the Lord's Supper, it must continually ask itself, why are we here and what are we after? Now, the whole series of sermons have been dealing with ethics in the 80s, and I think it's important for us to look at some questions that the church itself must face. Brief questions, without great answers, but to give some of the areas. In the first place, the church must face in the 80s that it can no longer afford to be the follower of social trends, but must indeed set the trend. We have seen far too often in our churches the ability to baptize, whether it be the radical right or the radical left. Baptize what has been going by and saying, oh, isn't that Christian? Can we join your bandwagon? And have seen too seldom the churches standing up and saying, thus saith the Lord, like the prophets. We have become embarrassed by individuals who are willing to speak with that kind of openness. And those of you who know me well might be a little bit flexible, but if week after week I were to stand before you and say, Ko Amar Adonai, thus saith the Lord, and point a finger like the prophets of old, you not only wouldn't show up, but you'd probably boot me out quickly. The kind of arrogance that he knows the will of God is the statement that would be made. And yet the biblical truth is that until each and every single one of us begins to say that in our lives and lead lives that are directed by that kind of impact, we will not make this world a place where God can live. And I've seen it too often, and it doesn't matter. There are many wonderful people who are showing all kinds of concerns, but the thing that we've been saying over and over again, that there is none but God, and God is God, and no system, no philosophy, no theology, no church, no one individual understands that totally. And therefore, to call something Christian is to raise serious doubts about our understanding of that system. We need the prophetic voice in the church that says, while I enjoy and work under and appreciate and am willing to say that in my understanding this might be the best of all possible worlds, under God I must still bring the judgment of heaven to earth. There's a second thing that I think we need to work on, and we have not even begun to touch it. And it's one of the greatest tragedies of the church, because it's a tragedy of society and where the church ought to be moving. And that is in the handling of individuals who, for one reason or another, are, quote, single, unquote. I want to reflect on something here that happened to one of our members, and I will identify her. You'll remember about a year ago this time, Doris Davidson lost her husband. It was a trying time for Doris, as anybody going through that, and as a young woman. And for a number of reasons, following the long period of adjustment towards the spring, it became apparent to her that she ought to go to California, where she was very comfortable as a human being. And she went, and she began to look for a church. Because while she had never been churched before, she found that the loving response and support and outreach of you people here at Pine Hill took a tragedy in her life and enabled her to grow with it. She found a church, and she went in, and she sat down, and she, in a tape recording to me, talked about her experience. It was a communion Sunday. The church was beautiful. She said, I had been raised a Catholic, so I, in a sense, appreciated, please, Jim, don't get me wrong for the casualness of Pine Hill, I appreciated the pomp and circumstance. The choir and choir boys and the beautiful organ of this large cathedral. And I looked around me and didn't feel totally comfortable because I was the youngest person in that church. And I looked at the sermon title on communion, and it said, The Christian Family. And I said to myself, oh, I'm glad I came, because I need a Christian family. Nice. So far, so good. And then the minister stood up in the pulpit and literally said, there is no room under God for single individuals. That is an aberration of God's plan. The only true happiness in the world is to be married and have a mate, and women be submissive to your mates. And if you don't have a mate, you are not fulfilling God's purpose. And a woman who had lost her husband and in the agony of readjusting is told God doesn't like her the way she is. Oh my God. That's Christian love? The beauty of the communion table, the sharing of the family, the reaching out, the sharing of children and saying, hey, here's a chance for you to participate in a wide-reaching family. We will share with one another. We will do things together. We will provide the Christian gospel, reaching out and healing and helping and accepting and saying to people, wherever your standing is in terms of society under God, you are. Isn't that interesting? I went through the church directory last week. We have 20 people in this church who are single. I'm not counting you kids. We'll give you... I took only over 21 or thereabouts. We have 20 people in this church who are single, some who have been married and have lost a mate by death, some who have never been married. 20 people in this church. That's more than 10% of our church membership, and when I looked over the names and traced them down, it's nearly 20% of our most active membership. Now, the church in the 80s is going to have to take seriously the fact that more and more and more and more people are being found in a situation where, without their choosing or with their choosing, they are in adult life living within themselves alone. The church is going to have to begin to move into a society and say to that society, we are going to change the moral standards to a way that a woman who is alone does not have to fear for her existence, because every time she opens up herself to talk to somebody, she's getting hit upon. Where she can be free to relate to people without them coming after her. Where men are being made to feel like fools for being the fools they are, leering after women as though that's the cool thing to do. Where women in particular, and men as well, do not have to present a cold, hard front to keep people away just because they don't have the strength to fight off the nonsensical attitudes of a society that say if you're single, you need something and I'm going to give it to you, honey. And the church, until it begins to say to people that the moral, spiritual raisings of our lives are such that we accept people for what they are and can love them with the best of the Christian gospel and reach out and hold them close and not overstep the boundaries of propriety, but share love with one another, has got to be said, because there is nothing worse than what we are doing to our single people. Making them guilty as though they had something that's wrong with them, making them alone, separating them from society, refusing to invite them into our homes because they might be a challenge to our marriage, and suddenly turning them off. Where in the world is the Christian mission going to speak if it doesn't begin to meet the needs of individuals and speak loudly and clearly? And that is one of the places it's got to go. And I'll tell you something else. If I counted on beyond those 20 that I could sort of list the names, and included those who, for one reason or another, have been within the last 5 to 10 years in the same situation, we will have increased that number almost twofold. That means, and people sitting in this room know exactly what I mean, because for one reason they've been divorced or widowed or widowered or whatever, and have remarried, that means that the single area is one to which the church must give total attention if it's going to be a humane world and a free world. You see, the church has not too often been willing to take that stance, because the church is a unique institution. It's the one institution that tells you to pay for what it's knocking you over the head about. Can you imagine any other institution telling you that you can do better, and as good as you are, you can do better, and that you're not doing this right, and you need to think about this, and continually saying to you that no matter how righteous you think you are, standing next to the righteousness of God, it's puny and you need to work again, and then say you need to support that? It's masochistic. Downright and totally masochistic that you ought to pay me to tell you, beat you over the head week after week after week after week after week. It's also wise. It's wise because one of the real healthy experiences of life is to have a place where both the good and the not so good are shared in a loving relationship. And I would submit to you that with rare examples, it is still, in spite of total failures in some areas, the church which says we are accepting and loving and challenging of your best. And one of the ethical statements in the 80s that I see the church having to make over and over and over again is not the pie in the sky type of thing, and not the fly-by-night religion that gets out and away from it all, but is the religion that holds to, helps, guides, and gives strength. And helps every single one of us in this church and every other church to look at ourselves and to say, hey, Jim, you're doing this pretty well, but you need some work in this area, and there are people here who can help you. Where in God's earth did we get the idea we had to do it all by ourselves? Where in God's earth did I grow up with the idea that to have a tear was unmanly, and that to ask for any help of any kind from anybody was a failure as a human being? Where in God's earth did I get that point where I could stand alone and I needed nobody? Where in God's earth and in God's understanding of life did I fail to know that as things happen, it is through the sharing that the solving comes. The beauty of the church and the beauty of the emphasis and the beauty of the caring and the beauty of the thing is that at times you do get wiped out and stepped on, but there is no problem that you or any other individual has that cannot be solved by the talents and love of God and the people sitting around you right now. None. Not a single one. In the last 7 years, the areas of mobilization of this particular congregation, wide-ranging as though they are, reaching out at times of need in finances, at times of need in emotional support, at times of need sharing, loving, giving, opening up, inviting in, asking, are such that this is a standard against which to measure ourselves in the 80s. But it is a standard which needs to be cast aside as inadequate as we grow in the next 18 years to become even more a church that with the strength of God meets the needs of its people. And as we join and sing the communion hymn, which I chose very particularly, Blessed Be the Tie That Binds, I hope that the commitment will be that I will do everything in my power to make this church